The champagne flute left my hand, as if it had finally decided it belonged to someone louder. Crystal burst across the marble like a spill of tiny stars, while 200 guests inhaled in the same shocked breath. "This is the family embarrassment we're stuck with, my new daughter-in-law," said sugar in her tone, steel in her eyes. Across the chandeliered ballroom, Robert Mitchell's face went as white as his tuxedo shirt. "Margaret Thompson," he whispered, and in that instant the air changed temperature as if the room itself recognized me before my son did. "My name is Margaret, though people who matter call me Maggie. For 15 years I practiced strategic invisibility, a discipline stitched from quiet choices, a navy dress you forget a minute after you see it, a reliable sedan that starts every morning, a small apartment that glows with warm lamps. I learned that real wealth often prefers silence, that the most secure doors are the ones no one notices." My son David never questioned the modest story I built around us. He grew into a decent man with a marketing career he earned by staying late and taking the unglamorous assignments, and when he fell in love with Samantha Mitchell after 8 months of glossy courtship, I met her twice and counted careful questions: whether I needed help with expenses as you get older, whether David's father left pension paperwork in good order. I filed away the curiosity, not the kindness. The Mitchell estate sprawled across 50 Connecticut acres lit by money and roses. Their chapel could seat 300. Their orchestra made Bones sit up straighter. Samantha floated through her wedding afternoon like a woman raised to be seen. I watched from a corner table and thought of David's father Tom, who would have liked the cake, but not the performance. When Samantha arrived with her parents in tow and introduced me in that honeyed voice she delivered, the line meant to shrink me. What she did not expect was her father's startled recognition as his champagne stalled halfway to his mouth. "Aren't you the woman from the Mitchell Holdings acquisition?" he asked, habits of power cracking into panic. I told him he had me confused with someone else. He and I both knew he did not. The truth began years earlier in a quiet kitchen, 2 engineers solving the same problem from opposite ends of the table. Tom had refined a power management system for smartphones in 2010, an elegant little algorithm that stretched battery life without breaking physics. We sold the patent in 2012 for $22 million and told our son we had received a comfortable settlement. Then we went to work. We learned the market's grammar the way immigrants learn survival blue chips, first then growth. Real estate in neighborhoods not yet bragging. A handful of founders whose math was clean and egos were not. Tom had patience that outlasted noise. By 2015, the seed had become $50 million. By 2018, $200 million. When Tom died in 2020, the portfolio was worth over $800 million, a map of decisions that looked like luck only to people who don't read maps. Mitchell Holdings arrived on my desk as a failing but fixable patient, a company with good bones and exhausted lungs. Robert Mitchell's Thunderbolt expansions had loaded it with debt it could not service. Operations were sound. Optics were theatrical. 2 years after Tom's funeral, I used $800 million to buy it through a shell designed for quiet ownership, installed sober managers, preserved jobs, and went home in my sedan. Robert kept a consulting title and an income stream that matched his dignity. I kept my privacy because it kept my son's life uncomplicated. After the wedding reception shattered, my anonymity sleep did not visit. At 7 a.m., David paced my living room like a metronome set to worry. He had the same crease between his brows he'd worn at 9 when he suspected I knew about the broken vase. Robert, he said, had pulled him aside to ask whether my family had been involved in material transactions, whether Tom's patents had been leveraged into acquisitions, whether the comfortable story David believed was more complicated. I poured coffee that tasted suddenly bitter and chose truth with training wheels. Before I could begin, my phone buzzed. Margaret, I think we should have lunch today. Samantha texted, diplomacy threaded through the line break. David's phone rang next her cheerful voice, carrying easily across my rug, already booking the priciest restaurant in town. She arrived 45 minutes early and took the corner table that commanded the room. A Bordeaux waited that cost more than some rents. She hugged us with choreography learned at fundraisers and dissected my simple black dress with eyes that measured returns. She spoke of Wharton, of complex structures, of the discreet elegance of investors who prefer footnotes to headlines. I nodded and let silence do its work. Then she placed her opening gambit on the white linen, a grainy signing day photo from 3 years earlier, showing a navy silhouette partly hidden by attorneys. The posture, she said sweetly, the way she holds her purse, remarkably similar. David stared, watching a puzzle assemble itself. I could feel the floor of our old life tilt. How do you tell your child that while he was building a career on merit, you were buying companies without blinking? I started gently a scaffold of facts. Tom's patent, $22 million, 5,200, 800 patients and spreadsheets, and the habit of listening longer than you speak. Samantha's smile sharpened. Coincidences are fascinating, she said, like our family's financial trouble beginning around the time someone paid $800 million and then vanished. David's hands shook as he put down his glass. Mom, are you who she thinks you are? He asked, voice steady from practice, not peace. The waiter appeared with lamb and asparagus, as if normalcy could be plated, and I understood that secrecy had protected my son, but also left him defenseless against a different kind of danger, the kind that smells opportunity and calls it family. I told him we would talk that evening at 6 p.m., with clear heads and the whole story. At 6 p.m., David sat on my couch, with his elbows on his knees, the city's evening light pooling across the rug like a truth serum. He did not shout. He listened. I told him that after his father's invention sold in 2012 for $22 million, we treated the windfall as a seed, not a trophy. That by 2015, it had grown to $50 million, by 2018 to $200 million, and by 2020 to over $800 million. That Mitchell Holdings had been a rescue, not a conquest. I said we had kept the secret because privacy is a moat, and I had hoped to let him live his life on the far bank. He pressed his palms together and stared at the window. I built my name on being ordinary, he said softly, as if speaking too loudly might send the floor tilting again. What does that make me now? It makes you the same man you were at 5 p.m., I told him. The money never lifted your presentations or sweetened your deadlines. He exhaled like air hurt. Samantha texted, he added. Lunch tomorrow at 1 p.m. She has thoughts on family planning. The phrase hung in the room like a chandelier made of knives. By 9 a.m. the next morning, I was in James Harrison's corner office, watching traffic sketch arteries through the city. James had been with us when $22 million was the whole map. He read the brief I'd requested with the care of a surgeon. Unusual request, he said at last, tapping the Mitchell family profile. Why the deep dive? Because last night felt like a subpoena in pearls, I told him. He adjusted his glasses. 2 headlines, he said. Robert's expansions in 2019 created a debt service cliff by 2021. Your acquisition prevented bankruptcy, and someone is making professional-level inquiries into your shell entities, not gossip groundwork. I did not ask who. How exposed, I said instead. Your structures are legal and layered, he replied, but determined hands can peel shingles in a storm. He let the sentence sit a moment. My advice owned the narrative before it owns you. At 1 p.m., Samantha had already taken the best vantage point in the restaurant and arranged a Bordeaux like a trophy between place settings. She greeted us with choreography and softened her voice to a benevolent hum. To family, she said. Then came the business. A foundation she proposed with 3 trustees herself. David and me, equal votes, equal say, equal virtues. To launch it with credibility, she said an initial endowment of $50 to $60 million would signal seriousness to the philanthropic community. The numbers slid across the table with practiced ease. David's eyes widened. Mine did not. I asked how voting deadlocks would break. She smiled like a teacher indulging a child. Democracy has ways, she said. Robust bylaws. I asked her if she loved my son. It was not a feint. The question dropped into the conversation like a weight, and the surface did not smooth. That's unfair, she said. Fairness, I replied, is clarity without comfort. At 6 p.m. that evening, the doorbell chimed, and Samantha entered my apartment in her negotiation suit, carrying a portfolio tabbed like a miniature courthouse. I had laid out a modest cheese plate and a bottle that cost exactly what a decent bottle should. She began with phrases that sound like diplomacy and behave like scaffolding transparency, stewardship, intergenerational responsibility. I listened, then set a folder on the coffee table. James's team had traced payments to a private investigations firm that specializes in corporate asset mapping consultations, with a law office known for trust disputes and 3 new credit accounts opened within the month. Timing told its own story. David turned pages with hands that trembled. "You hired investigators to dig into my mother?" he asked. Samantha lifted her chin. "To protect our family," she said. "If there are substantial assets, we need structure." I nodded toward another document. "Your parents' estate is mortgaged near the hilt," I said. "Investment accounts drawn down to keep appearances upright. Most of your father's current income comes from consulting arrangements sustained by the very company I own." Silence lengthened until the walls seemed farther apart. When someone investigates me, I return the courtesy I added. There were things I did not say, like the recording of a phone call to a college roommate, where she described being done with men who could not provide and determined to find a family with prospects. I did not have to. David had stopped reading and was looking at the person he had married as if she were a headline he could not verify. The next days moved like chess clocks. At 10 p.m. one night, Robert cornered David at a fundraiser and asked whether I intended to consolidate power or act like family. At 7 a.m. the following morning, James phoned with a voice flattened by urgency. "We have a problem," he said. "Someone has been making inquiries with the commission about your beneficial ownership and reporting. Insider trading whispers. Complexity misread as concealment." I stared at the far line where the city meets itself. "How serious? Serious enough that you should not let this sprawl," he said. "Regulatory curiosity multiplies. Resolve the family conflict before it becomes a headline." I knew who had lit the fuse. It was clever lawfare weaponized scrutiny to force a settlement trade anonymity for peace. Clever and cynical are cousins. By 3 p.m. that same day, David stood in my doorway, looking hollowed. "She filed for separation," he said the words like gravel. "Her lawyer cites fear of exposure to liabilities from undisclosed family assets." He looked at me as if searching for the mother who packed lunches before the strategist who signed term sheets. "It feels like you engineered this," he said. "Like you wanted to prove a thesis more than you wanted me married." I told him I never wanted his marriage destroyed. I wanted him to see it clearly. He stared at the floor for a long time. "What do you need me to do?" he asked at last. There are questions that lead only forward. The conference room at James Harrison's office smelled faintly of polished wood and old leather, a place where money and arguments often went to duel. By 10 a.m., the players had assembled Samantha in her precision-tailored suit, her attorney, Marcus Webb, arranging papers like weapons, her parents Robert and Patricia stiff in their seats, and my son shoulders squared, but eyes tired. I sat at the far end of the table with James, who had already reminded me in a whisper, that silence, when wielded correctly, can be sharper than any accusation. Marcus opened with flourish, his tone rehearsed for juries and headlines. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "my client has reason to believe you've concealed substantial assets while her family endured financial hardship, suggesting a deliberate pattern of deception." James countered calmly, citing legal compliance, audited structures, and transparency to regulators. Samantha leaned forward, her voice smooth but tight. "This is not about legality, Margaret. It's about family. You've hidden your power while pretending to be something you're not. You let my father believe he failed." I reminded her that Robert had failed. His expansions had left the company on life support. I had resuscitated it, preserved employees, restored solvency. "That isn't cruelty," I said evenly. "It's stewardship." Robert finally spoke, his voice strained. "Mrs. Thompson, you can't deny you've been strategic about concealing your role in our family's affairs." "Strategic, yes," I replied, "but not deceptive. You never asked. I never volunteered." "That is not the same as lying." Patricia's diamonds caught the overhead light as her hand fluttered at her throat, but she said nothing. Marcus pressed forward, unveiling their proposal of family trust governed by a board of trustees, me, David, and Samantha, into which I would contribute a substantial portion of my assets. Distributions would be structured for fairness. I nearly laughed. They wanted to seize the fortress I had built, then call it equity. Samantha's eyes gleamed as though she had already moved in. "It's democratic," she said brightly, a shared vision of family stewardship. I rose, walked to the wide window, and looked down 20 stories to where ordinary people carried grocery bags and coffee cups, blissfully free of boardroom theater. Then I turned back. "I have a counter-proposal," I said. "You have 72 hours to withdraw every complaint and end all investigations. In return, I will provide a one-time settlement for you and your parents. Enough to preserve your lifestyle without further contact with me or my son." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "What kind of settlement?" I looked directly at Samantha. $5 million. The room stilled. David's head jerked toward me in disbelief. Samantha repeated the number slowly, as though tasting it. $5 million to walk away. "Correct," I said. "No lawsuits, no investigations, no contact." Marcus was already calculating. $5 million up front outweighed years of costly litigation. Samantha's composure cracked just slightly, but David exploded first. "You're bargaining my marriage like it's a business deal." I met his fury with calm. "Isn't that exactly what it's been from the beginning?" He turned to Samantha, his voice raw. "Did you marry me or for money you thought I had?" Her hesitation lasted too long. Silence became her confession. I pressed again, $5 million plus arrangements for Robert to retain consulting fees and the estate to remain solvent. "Or nothing," I finished. "Refuse, and you inherit litigation, foreclosure, and years of costs you can't finance." The deadline was noon the next day. I left the room without looking back. At 11:47 a.m. the next morning, James's line rang. Marcus Webb's voice was flat. They would accept. By 5 p.m., contracts were signed, funds wired, and silence purchased. For $5 million, Samantha and her parents vanished from our orbit as if they had never existed. David filed for divorce the next week. He moved like a man crossing fog, steady but unwilling to look behind him. He did not forgive me at once. Our conversations became clipped silences, heavy. He mourned the woman he had loved and the trust in me that secrecy had fractured. I mourned the years I had spent mistaking protection for honesty. 6 months later, on a quiet Sunday evening, my phone rang. David's voice carried a new lightness. "Mom, I met someone. Her name's Sarah. She's a teacher. When I told her you live in a modest apartment and drive a reliable car, she smiled and said that sounded like a woman with her priorities straight. I felt a knot in my chest loosen for the first time in years. When he brought Sarah to dinner, I wore my grandmother's pearls and served roast chicken with potatoes. No portfolios, no negotiations. Just a meal stories of David as a boy and laughter that sounded uncalculated. Sarah looked at my son not as a prospect, but as a person. I knew then he had chosen someone who loved the man, not the myth. As the evening ended and they walked out into the night, I reflected on what the past months had carved into me. Wealth is not the enemy, but secrecy can be. Predators circle where shadows lie. I had built privacy as armor, but discovered too late that armor can corrode trust. The lesson was simple, but difficult families survive, not by what they own, but by what they choose to share: truth, respect, loyalty. Money only matters when it blinds us to those. If this story moved you, I hope you'll take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss the next story. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know.